So first and foremost, I think, what we just heard around kind of the security part and moving into cloud environments and through this kind of cloud transformation piece, I think is very important and set a good field up for what I'm going to really cover now. We will blitz through some of this, and we're tight on time today, but really what we're going to be focusing on is what kind of are the other areas to think about when you're going through this digital transformation. And I think, by being here today on this call already, you've taken kind of that first step. If not already, about actually taking that consideration. And that's what we're going to talk about being an important part of this, because these are tools that you should absolutely be using and absolutely be moving forward to. Certainly we do inside our own business here and many others around as well. So a little bit just around myself. So I'm a senior product specialist here at Datto for EMEA, in EMEA even, and that's looking after our SaaS portfolio. For those of you that might not know Datto ourselves, so we are a technology and security company, and we provide solutions for managed service providers like Levett Consultancy here, ultimately to better protect your data and systems. And we work with over 18,000 MSPs globally. So I'm going to share some of the intel we've gained from that, particularly in the last few years, with you today, and hopefully it can give you guys some good points and strategy for moving forward. So what we're going to look at is what's happening with SaaS data. Is that data vulnerable? Where does the responsibility kind of lie with that, and how can you best protect yourself and make sure your schools are indeed protected? So this is a typical environment that you guys are probably managing or having managed for you right now already. The area we're specifically focusing on, as in theme with today, is really the SaaS application side. Specifically Google and Microsoft is where we're going to be looking at. So first really starts off with the evolution of SaaS data, both thus far and indeed in the future as well. I don't think there's anyone today that I come across that hasn't at least started the journey in some form or another. So it's really starting to say, where have we got to so far, particularly in the last couple of years, and indeed what does it look like as you move forward and progress with this kind of transformation and moving more of into your services of the kind of online SaaS application world. And it simply starts with where we've got to already. Migrations to the cloud are moving faster than ever. Again, clearly from you guys coming to this talk today, it shows that you're obviously on that journey as well. But even if we look before the last couple of years, right, we'd already reached a key junction point in SaaS application adoption. Education always has been kind of looking at it a little bit from the distance and getting closer and closer, but Google Drive is already hitting over 1 billion users. And the education sector has a lot to gain from using, M365 in Google. And it's very much become a case of table stakes at this point. Moving the cloud improves efficiency, teams can collaborate, across colleagues, students. It just makes sense to do it. For everything we've already heard today, I'm not going to cover ground we've already gone through. But it's certainly been something that we've seen on a massive scale in the last couple of years. So this one's particularly from a Microsoft Teams stat here, but the same can be said to Google, as I say, hitting over 1 billion users before the pandemic in Google Drive. But Microsoft, we saw kind of highlights what's happened in the last couple of years. They saw just shy of 900% growth of their Teams adoption. Now that's across the board of verticals. Just shows to show that actually the adoption there was for things like today, right? We're in a Google Meets today, actually having these communications, these sessions that were once always in person, being able to collaborate with your teams, have the meetings that need to happen. But what's also occurred as a result of that is exposure for your staff and your students to a plethora of other tools that are absolutely fantastic as well. Google Drive, OneDrive, all of these different elements that we've got in place. That's now started to see more and more data either traversing through these SaaS applications now, or just outright living there. They may not even be on your on-premise kind of traditional server-based infrastructure like once before. So what are we saying? So there's more and more data moving into these platforms, either equal to or quite often, and certainly in the future, more than we've seen on those on-premise servers. The responsibility and how much of the data is actually kind of being traced to where it lives now has started to become a bit of a blurred line, particularly in the pace we've had to move in the last couple of years. How much of that data sits where now is starting to become very difficult to crack, and a lot of customers, and maybe the case for yourselves, aren't even necessarily sure where the data is sitting at this point. And there's been less focus on actually what do you do around that data. We've always been very good as an industry, and certainly in the education sector, particularly in my previous life with the security firm I worked as well, making sure the security levels and such, protecting that on-premise data, encryption and such as well. But the same kind of detailing hasn't been looked at so much in this area so far. So do we need to look at that? Is that data actually vulnerable? and vulnerable ultimately to permanent, downtime or data loss even. Well, it's a very interesting one, and we're starting to see that the threats to cloud environments are, in trend with the usage, growing faster than ever as well. Now, again, it's very much not a take our word from it. Pretty much any source you type into, Google of, ransomware attacks, malware attacks for the previous year, etc., and there's a plethora of kind of source of information in there. Again, this one from Gartner is saying that 70% of organizations will have suffered disruption due to data loss by the end of this year. In fact, I looked up just this morning from the National Cybersecurity Centre just to see if there was any stats around last year in particular. And they put out an alert around further ransomware attacks, specifically focusing against schools, colleges and universities in the UK. So it's happening now already, and the pace of that is just increasing. And there's a few reasons for that. First and foremost, I mentioned we work with 18,000 MSPs. We survey them about ransomware on an annual basis to create a report. And some of the findings that we found was, 300% increase in cybercrime from since COVID-19 happened, increase of ransomware attacks, and actually our service partners like Levett saying that the increase of remote working and remote teaching as such has increased those ransomware attacks through that as a process as well. Now, a large part of this is around what we call first encounter threats. And by that, I mean there's traditional securities that you may be utilizing already. If not, it's definitely a conversation to have with Levett around making sure there's prevention level in there as well. However, even with a lot of those prevention tools, Microsoft, for example, having an inbuilt offering, they're signature based, i.e. what do we already know as a threat and we are going to bar from getting into our environments. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't allow for all the new threats that are now typically automated as well, and that's variations that aren't going to be recognized and able to get through, which means a lot of first time attacks get through and then things are updated and other people are protected. But considering we see over 600,000 pieces of new malware created on a daily basis now, that's a lot of first people that have to get hit. So it's something, again, I would recommend you speak to Levett if you review your current kind of email and SaaS kind of threat protection. Definitely have a conversation with them. We last year actually released a product particularly focusing on those 0-day threats, and that's something they can inform you more about today after this session as well. So we've seen ransomware attacks on the rise. We've already kind of covered that. Again, the big reason for that is the variations, and I just wanted to bring up a particular slide that might kind of bring some of this home of what do we mean by automation and variations. So there's various different types of ransomware you see on screen at the moment named. You might be familiar with some of them already. I think the one majority of people tend to recognize here is WannaCry. Obviously, it was a big prolific one that hit the NHS a number of years ago and got such a headline because it was one of the first worm type ransomwares, i.e. ones that can actually spread across a network and various systems. Well, WannaCry alone has 12,000 unique variations of what it actually is. So that's 12,000 different options that could be seen as, not recognized by that kind of signature based and able to get through first and foremost. Now, everything we're talking about here so far is about preventing outside threats coming in. What we haven't talked about, which is possibly the biggest reason for data loss events in any platform, and I think that's a point we'll come back to. We've just moved the data. We haven't changed the considerations we need to take. But what's following the data is your users of that data, which are the number one reason for data loss, downtime events. And as Levett, we were talking earlier on in the part of their presentation, having that kind of training of your staff, catching them, taking them to a training course is a crucial part that helps reduce these kind of threats as well. But, accidental deletion, forgetting to save, malicious deletion. Unfortunately, I heard recently from a customer that a pupil in a secondary school had tried to delete someone they didn't get on with GCSE coursework that was on the systems. Having a good recovery in place prevented that from being, as detrimental as it could potentially be, but actually preventing yourselves from being in a state where you could actually lose data from people using it as well. So what kind of protection gaps do you need to be considering and thinking around? Well, the first and foremost lies with what should you be looking at? What is your responsibility? And we've got this here, which we call the shared responsibility model, which I think outlines it quite nicely in terms of what are actually these providers responsible for and where does your take up come in place in this. So everything you see on the left hand side of the screen there where the vendor is responsible, so Microsoft, Google, they're really responsible, and their primary objective is hardware failure, software failure, natural disaster, power outage. What does that actually mean to you guys? Uptime of the platform, and they do an exceptional job of it. Microsoft had a couple of blips last year, but all in all, Microsoft and Google are fantastic at making sure that you can access their systems as much as possible whenever it's needed. What they're not responsible for is the data that sits on those platforms. Now, there's various tools that are inbuilt, as we've heard already today, that can help you prevent kind of the risk to this, and there is some inbuilt retention of data as well, but it's not where their responsibility lies. They're not responsible for human error, programmatic error, malicious, inciting attacks like we talked about, external threats. That's not where their kind of part of the bargain takes place. And in fact, we go as far as actually seeing this in terms of Microsoft in particular having their own SLA. They're not liable for data loss during outages and such. And the really important part at the bottom here is, we recommend you regularly back up your content and data using third-party applications and services like what I've come here to talk today, which is datto SaaS protection that Levett can bring into your organization and make sure that you are protected from data loss. So they go as far as actually telling you to do it. Google have a similar stance, around it's critical around making sure that your data is backed up and actually understanding where the native recovery in these tools kind of ends and where your responsibility picks up. So around some of the automatic deletion after 30 days and stuff, there's various policies in place and things. But again, it's really understanding what do you have with these tools and where does my part come in to make sure that the data is, the integrity is there and we're able to get it back should the worst case scenario happen. All in all, it's all about taking a multi-layered approach with both SaaS protection, as I'm here to talk about, and indeed that security stance. Where we're talking here, the SaaS protection, which is ultimately the backup and recovery of that data and having it in a separate location from either Microsoft or Google, it's the cure. We're not saying you shouldn't have the prevention as well, the security part. And again, we have offerings in that space, but it's actually saying that we're saying bring the cure to the table, because even those prevention security tools don't always necessarily protect you from the inside user threat that can occur, intentional or otherwise. So what is datto SaaS protection? Well, put simply, it's a cloud-to-cloud backup solution that retains all of your data that you need, automatic 3 backups a day, flexible retention, everything you can see on the side there, non-destructive even restores. So if you need to bring data back but there's been updated versions, it's not going to overwrite or anything like that. Incredibly flexible, whether granular or on a wider scale that is needed. What's probably more important to me here on the bottom right of the screen is actually what can it protect. So whether you're utilizing Microsoft or Google, it's really going to capture the data from all those key elements you see there, all nicely wrapped under one license. And I think while we talk about licenses, it's worth mentioning actually the reason that, or part of the reason that Levett have partnered with Datto, is that we've created an incredibly simple model for you guys to be able to digest and have as a predictable spend around it as well. There are other solutions out there similar to what we do, but the vast majority are based on what we call a price per gig model. How much data do you have? And this is the rising costs that reflect that, because data only goes one way, particularly if you're going through this transformation, planning to ingest more data into these platforms. Well, we made it incredibly simple for you by making it a per user model. Doesn't matter how much your data grows, it's simply how many users have you got and would you like a retention of a year or infinite? It makes it incredibly easy for you guys to have as part of your budgetary requirements and prevents that kind of ever-growing cost that you can have with ever-growing data, which is why it's made it so popular and really easy for you guys to have in place as a result. So what is it really offering? Peace of mind, being able to recover quickly and easily from regardless of the situation, whether it's external threats or internal threats, whether accidental or not. Saving on deprovisioned users. If you have change of staff and such, you can actually, depending on your license, reissue that license elsewhere, but keep the backup in place so you're not going to lose data and not having to just keep increasing user counts in some of these platforms. Recover a point in time. So it's the last defense against ransomware ultimately. Ransom cloud is a thing. You can get ransomware inside of these platforms now and encrypt your data. It's the last line of defense to make sure you'll be able to recover from that as well. So all data is at risk. I don't think anything's changed in terms of where we come from on these on-premise environments, but it's especially so in SaaS data right now. Everything I've talked to you about today isn't a secret. Cyber criminals are fully aware of everything I've also brought to your attention, and they see the data moving into these SaaS applications really as a low-hanging fruit. There's more and more data moving into these platforms, but ultimately right now, statistically, far less protection on them. In fact, only around 34% of people using these tools have a backup solution in place. we're not the only ones that know that. And ultimately the bad guys' goals is to get enough of your data to make it painful enough for you to want to pay them some money. So they're seeing this as a real targeted area, and that's why we're seeing a huge rise of attacks, because it's seen as a low-hanging fruit for them right now. So I don't want to take up too much time. Really, just final kind of takeaways from myself today is, whether you know it or not, more of your data is either residing or just moving through these platforms now. It's good to take stock of that. Levett is certainly something that can help you with that as well. The risks to data are already here and are growing. They were a focus for the cyber criminals. They see it as an opportunity. SaaS protection really, as a result, can't be seen as an optional extra. Having kind of this level of prevention, of course, you'll procure as well, prevention and cure table, and really speak to Levett Consultancy about really protecting yourselves from these SaaS data loss and what that looks like for your schools today.